The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Missouri Historical Society archives in St. Louis, casting long rectangular patterns across the restoration lab. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her magnifying lamp, her trained eyes focused on the sepia-toned photographs spread before her. At 34, she had restored hundreds of historical photographs, but this 1887 image from the Ozark Mountains held something different, something that made her lean closer. The photograph showed a typical frontier family. 15 people arranged in rigid formation outside a rough-hewn cabin. The patriarch stood center, beard full and eyes hard with the determination of a man who had carved life from unforgiving land. His wife sat beside him, hands folded, face weathered beyond her years. Children of various ages surrounded them, their expressions serious in the way people posed when photography required several minutes of absolute stillness. Sarah had been working on this photograph for 3 days. The image belonged to the Crawford County Historical Preservation Committee, donated by an elderly woman named Margaret Thornton who claimed it showed her great-great-grandfather's family. The photograph had suffered water damage, fading, and years of improper storage. Sarah's job was to digitally restore it, bringing clarity to faces that had blurred with time. She worked methodically, using specialized software to remove scratches, adjust contrast, and recover details lost to decay. The faces slowly emerged with greater definition. She could see the rough texture of homespun clothing, the weathered wood of the cabin walls, the lean hunting dog sitting at the patriarch's feet. Then she saw it. Behind the patriarch, slightly to the left, partially obscured by what appeared to be intentional overexposure or chemical manipulation of the original plate, there was another figure. Sarah's breath caught. She increased the magnification, adjusted the exposure levels on her screen, and applied a series of careful filters designed to reveal hidden details in damaged photographs. The young woman emerged from the darkness. She stood apart from the family group, positioned near the cabin's doorway. Her posture was different from the others, not the rigid formality of a posed subject, but something more natural, as if she had been captured mid-movement or perhaps hadn't been meant to be in the photograph at all. Her dress was simpler than the matriarch's, her hair uncovered and loose in a way that suggested youth or perhaps lower social standing, but it was her face that stopped Sarah's hand on the mouse. Even through the degradation of time and the apparent attempt to obscure her from the image, the young woman's expression was visible. There was something in her eyes, defiance, sadness, perhaps both. And there was something else that made Sarah's historian instincts come alive with curiosity. The young woman was holding something. An infant. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing through possibilities. Why would someone be partially hidden in a family photograph? The obvious answer was that she wasn't meant to be visible, that whoever had developed this photograph had deliberately tried to fade her from the image. The chemicals used in early photography made this possible: selective exposure, dodging during the development process, or even physical manipulation of the negative. Someone had wanted this woman erased from the family history. Sarah pulled up her research notes. The photograph had come with minimal documentation. Margaret Thornton had provided a handwritten list of names: James Henry Buchanan, the patriarch, his wife Martha, and their 11 children. The list matched the visible figures in the main group. But there was no mention of a 12th child or any other person who might have been present when the photograph was taken. She picked up her phone and dialed the number Margaret Thornton had left with the Historical Society. After 4 rings, an elderly woman's voice answered, formal and cautious. "Mrs. Thornton, this is Sarah Mitchell from the Missouri Historical Society. I'm calling about the photograph restoration you commissioned." "Yes, Miss Mitchell. Is it finished?" "Not quite. I've encountered something interesting during the restoration process, and I wanted to discuss it with you before proceeding." Sarah chose her words carefully. "When I enhanced the image, I discovered there's another person in the photograph who wasn't immediately visible. A young woman, standing behind the main family group. She appears to be holding an infant." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Sarah wondered if the connection had been lost. "Mrs. Thornton? Are you still there?" "I'm here." The elderly woman's voice had changed, becoming tighter, more guarded. "What exactly are you asking me, Miss Mitchell?" "I'm asking if you know who this person might be. She's not listed on the family roster you provided, But she's definitely in the photograph. Someone appears to have tried to obscure her from the image, probably during the original development process. Another long pause. Sarah could hear shallow breathing on the other end of the line. My family hired you to restore the photograph, Miss Mitchell, not to investigate it. I expect you to complete the work as contracted and deliver the restored image within the agreed time frame. Mrs. Thornton, I understand, but as a historian I feel obligated to. The photograph shows my great-great-grandfather James Buchanan and his legitimate family. That is what I expect the restored image to show. If there are shadows or chemical artifacts in the original, I trust you to correct them as part of the restoration process. Good day, Miss Mitchell. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, then back at the computer screen where the young woman's face gazed out from 1887, holding her infant, standing in the shadow of a family that had tried to erase her. The historian in Sarah knew she should respect the client's wishes. The contracted work was straightforward: restore the photograph to its best possible condition. But something about Margaret Thornton's reaction troubled her. The defensiveness, the insistence on legitimate family, the deliberate dismissal of the discovered figure as mere shadows or artifacts. Sarah had spent her career bringing clarity to historical images, recovering faces and moments that time had tried to steal. The idea of deliberately obscuring this woman again, of finishing what someone had started in 1887, felt wrong. She saved her work and locked her workstation, then walked down the corridor to the office of Dr. Marcus Webb, the Society's Director of Historical Research. Marcus was 62, with silver hair and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent decades untangling the complicated threads of American history. He looked up from a stack of documents as Sarah knocked on his open door. Sara, come. You look like you've found something interesting. Interesting and complicated. She explained the discovery, the hidden figure in the photograph, and Margaret Thornton's reaction to her inquiry. Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. So someone wanted this woman erased from the family record, and more than a century later, her descendant wants to keep her that way. Exactly. But I can't stop thinking about who she was. And that baby. What happened to them? Why were they hidden? The Ozarks in the 1880s, Marcus said thoughtfully. That's post-Civil War, Reconstruction era in Missouri. The Buchanan name is significant in Crawford County history. If I remember correctly, James Buchanan was one of the founding families of the region. Owned substantial land, operated a mill. Respected family. Which makes the erasure even more significant, Sarah said. Important families don't hide people unless there's something to hide. Marcus studied her for a moment. You want to investigate this, don't you? I want to know who she was. I want to know her story. Someone tried very hard to make sure she was forgotten, and I think that's exactly why she shouldn't be. Sarah, you know the complications here. Margaret Thornton is the client. She's paying for a restoration, not a genealogical investigation. If you pursue this against her wishes, it could create problems for the society. I know, but I'm not suggesting we do anything with the society's resources or on the society's time. This would be my own research on my own time. I have vacation days accumulated. I could take a long weekend, drive down to Crawford County, look through local records. If I find something, I find something. If I don't, at least I tried. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but understand that whatever you discover remains separate from the contracted work. You complete Mrs. Thornton's restoration exactly as she requested. Your personal research is your own. Agreed. Thank you, Marcus. As Sarah returned to her lab, she felt the familiar excitement that came with a new historical puzzle. She looked again at the young woman in the photograph, at the infant in her arms, at the deliberate shadow that had hidden them for over a century. Who were you? Sarah whispered to the screen. And why did they want you forgotten? The woman in the photograph stared back across time, her secret locked in sepia and silver, waiting for someone to finally hear her story. Sarah's Subaru wound through the Ozark Hills on Highway 19, the November morning crisp and clear. She had left St. Louis before dawn, watching the city lights fade in her rearview mirror as she headed southwest toward Crawford County. The landscape changed gradually, urban sprawl giving way to small towns, then to the rolling forested hills that had defined this region for millennia. She had spent the previous evening preparing for this trip. A call to the Crawford County Archives had confirmed they maintained historical records dating back to the 1850s. Birth certificates, death records, property deeds, and census data. If the young woman in the photograph had lived in the area, there would be traces of her existence somewhere in those documents. Sarah had also done background research on James Buchanan. The patriarch in the photograph had been a significant figure in Crawford County's early development. He had arrived in Missouri in 1869, purchased substantial acreage along the Merrimack River, and established a grist mill that served the scattered farming communities throughout the region. By 1887, when the photograph was taken, he was considered a pillar of the community, a church elder, a businessman, and a family man with 11 children. 11 documented children. But the baby in the hidden woman's arms suggested there might have been more to the story. Steelville appeared as she crested a hill, the county seat nestled in a valley where the Merrimack River curved through limestone bluffs. Population 400, the road sign declared, though Sarah suspected that was optimistic. The town center consisted of a few blocks of brick buildings from the late 1800s, many showing their age with faded paint and sagging facades. The Crawford County Archives occupied a corner of the county courthouse, a 3-story limestone structure that dominated the town square. Sarah parked on the street and gathered her laptop bag and research notes. Inside, the archives smelled of old paper and furniture polish. A woman in her 50s looked up from a desk cluttered with file folders and a desktop computer that appeared to date from the late 90s. "Help you?" she asked, her accent carrying the soft drawl of southern Missouri. "I'm Sarah Mitchell from the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis. I called yesterday about accessing your historical records." The woman's face brightened. "Oh yes, from the city. I'm Louise Perkins. I manage the archives here. We don't get many visitors from the Historical Society. What exactly are you researching?" Sarah had prepared her answer carefully. "I'm working on a photograph restoration project involving the Buchanan family. James Henry Buchanan and his family, circa 1887. I'm trying to verify some details about the family composition for the restoration documentation." Louise nodded, gesturing for Sarah to follow her into a back room lined with filing cabinets and shelves of bound ledgers. "The Buchanans, sure. Important family around here, back in the day. Most of them moved on eventually, but there's still some Buchanan descendants in the county. What specifically do you need?" "I'd like to look at census records from 1880 and 1890, if you have them. Birth and death certificates from that period. And any property records associated with James Buchanan." "We have most of that. Census records are on microfilm. Birth and death certificates from that era are incomplete. A lot of births weren't officially registered, especially in rural areas. But I'll show you what we have." For the next 2 hours, Sarah worked through the archives. The 1880 census listed James Buchanan, age 38, his wife Martha, age 34, and 7 children. The 1890 census, which Sarah knew had been mostly destroyed in a fire, had no surviving records for Crawford County. But she found a local enumeration from 1888 that listed 11 children in the Buchanan household. She cross-referenced with birth certificates. 6 of the children had official records, filed with the county. 5 did not, which wasn't unusual for the era. Rural births were often attended by midwives rather than doctors, and many families didn't bother with official registration. What was more interesting was what she found in the property records. In 1886, James Buchanan had purchased an additional 50 acres adjacent to his existing land. The transaction was routine, except for one detail buried in the deed documentation. The property had come with a small tenant house, and the deed specifically mentioned that the current occupant had right of residence for natural lifetime. That was unusual. Most property sales transferred ownership completely, with no strings attached. But this deed had been written to protect someone's right to live on the land regardless of ownership changes. "Louise," Sarah called across the archive room, "do you have any maps showing property divisions in the 1880s? Louise produced a large ledger of hand-drawn property maps. Sarah found the Buchanan land, traced the boundaries, and located the tenant house, a small structure about a quarter-mile from the main Buchanan homestead, near the river. "Do you know if this structure still exists?" Sarah asked, pointing to the map. Louise studied it, then shook her head. "I'd have to check more recent surveys, but most of those old tenant houses are long gone, either collapsed or torn down. The land there has changed hands several times since the Buchanans left." Sarah photographed the map with her phone, then returned to the birth and death records. She was looking for any child born to the Buchanan household between 1885 and 1890 who might not be listed on the official family roster. She found nothing definitive. But in a drawer of miscellaneous county records, she discovered something else, a small ledger labeled Indigent Relief 1880 to 1895. The county had maintained a fund to provide minimal support for those unable to support themselves, primarily widows and orphans. On a page dated March 1889, she found an entry, Mary Catherine, infant, support payment $3 monthly, guardian J.H. Buchanan. Sarah's pulse quickened. An infant with only a first and middle name, supported by county funds but with James Buchanan listed as guardian. That suggested the child had no parents able to care for her, but Buchanan had taken some responsibility. The payments continued monthly through 1893, then stopped. She photographed the ledger page and continued searching, but found no other references to Mary Catherine. No birth certificate, no death certificate, no further county records. "Louise, is there anyone in Steelville who might remember stories about the Buchanan family? Any local historians or older residents?" Louise thought for a moment. "Well, there's Harold Griswold. He's 93, lives in the nursing home here in town. His family's been in Crawford County since before the Buchanans arrived. Sharp as a tack, loves to talk about local history. If there were stories about the Buchanans, Harold would know them." Sarah copied down the nursing home's address and thanked Louise for her help. As she left the courthouse, she felt the familiar tension between the documented historical record and the hidden truth. The official documents showed 11 legitimate Buchanan children and an otherwise exemplary family. But the photograph's hidden figure, the protective deed clause, and the mysterious Mary Catherine suggested a different story. The Steelville Care Center was a low brick building on the edge of town, surrounded by oak trees showing the last of their autumn color. Sarah introduced herself at the front desk and asked to speak with Harold Griswold. "He's in the common room," the nurse said. "He'll be thrilled to have a visitor. Harold loves company." Harold Griswold sat in a wheelchair by a window overlooking a small garden. He was thin and bent with age, but his eyes were bright and alert behind thick glasses. When Sarah introduced herself and mentioned the Buchanan family, his face lit up with interest. "James Buchanan," Harold said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Now there's a name I haven't heard in a long time. My grandfather knew him. Used to take our corn to his mill for grinding. What's your interest in the Buchanans?" Sarah showed him a print of the photograph on her tablet, carefully cropped to show only the main family group. "I'm restoring this photograph for a descendant. I'm trying to verify the family details. Do you remember any stories about James Buchanan's family?" Harold studied the image, nodding slowly. "That's them all right. Respected family, at least publicly. But my grandfather used to say there were shadows in that family, secrets they kept tight." "What kind of secrets?" Harold looked at her carefully, assessing. "Young lady, you're asking questions that suggest you already suspect something. Why don't you tell me what you really want to know?" Sarah made a decision. She pulled up the enhanced version of the photograph, showing the hidden figure. "During restoration, I discovered this woman and her baby. Someone tried to hide them from the photograph. I want to know who they were." Harold stared at the image for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "So that photograph survived. I heard there was one, but I thought it had been destroyed. My grandfather told me about her. Said it was the family scandal that everyone knew about but nobody talked about." "Who was she?" "Her name was Caroline. Caroline Meredith. She was a hired girl, came to work for the Buchanans in 1885. She was 16, maybe 17. Came from a family that had nothing. Father was a drunk, mother had died. The Buchanans took her in to help Martha with the housework and the children. It was considered a charitable act. Harold paused, his gnarled hands gripping the wheelchair's armrests. And she got pregnant, Sarah said quietly. In 1886. The baby was born in early 1887, a girl. Caroline claimed James Buchanan was the father. He denied it, said she had been involved with some farmhand. The church leaders sided with Buchanan. He was a respected elder. She was just a poor hired girl with no family to defend her. They called her a liar and worse. What happened to her? Buchanan couldn't just throw her out. Would have looked bad, and besides, there were people who suspected the truth. So he set her up in that tenant house on his property, gave her right of residence, paid her enough to survive, but kept her away from the main house, away from his legitimate family. She lived there with her daughter for years, barely scraping by, while Buchanan went on with his respectable life. The daughter's name was Mary Catherine, Sarah said. Harold looked surprised. You found records? County indigent relief payments. Buchanan was listed as guardian. That sounds right. He paid the minimum to keep them alive, enough to salve his conscience, but not enough to acknowledge them. My grandfather said Caroline used to walk into town sometimes, to buy supplies or attend church. People would cross the street to avoid her. She was treated like a ghost, someone who shouldn't exist. What happened to them? To Caroline and Mary Catherine? That's where the story gets darker. In the winter of 1893, there was a terrible cold snap. Temperatures dropped below zero for days. Caroline's tenant house, it wasn't built well, just rough timber. She ran out of firewood, and Mary Catherine, who was maybe 6 by then, got sick. Pneumonia, probably. Harold's voice had dropped almost to a whisper. Sarah leaned closer to hear. Buchanan could have helped. His main house was warm, he had medicine, a doctor available. But he didn't do anything. Maybe he figured if the problem just went away, he could finally be free of it. The girl died. And Caroline, she just broke. Lost everything. She left Crawford County after the girl died, and nobody knows what became of her. My grandfather always felt guilty about that. He was a boy then, but he remembered seeing Caroline walking to town carrying her daughter's body wrapped in a blanket, taking her to the church for burial. He said nobody helped her. They all just watched. The room felt very quiet. Sarah found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Is Mary Catherine buried here in Steelville? If she is, it's in the old cemetery by the Methodist Church. Unmarked grave, most likely. They didn't give proper burials to the children of scandal back then. Sarah sat with Harold for another hour, listening to his memories of Crawford County's past. When she finally left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Ozark hills. She drove to the Methodist Church Cemetery, a small plot on a hillside overlooking the Merrimack River. Many of the older graves had been worn to illegibility by time and weather. In the far corner, in an area with no marked stones, Sarah stood looking at the uneven ground. Somewhere here, a 6-year-old girl named Mary Catherine was buried, her only memorial the faded record of county indigent payments and the shadows of an old photograph. Sarah took a photograph of the cemetery in the fading light, then returned to her car. She had found Caroline's story, or at least the outline of it. But the full truth, what happened to Caroline after she left, whether she found peace, whether anyone ever acknowledged the wrong done to her, remained hidden in history's gaps. As she drove back towards St. Louis, the young woman in the photograph seemed more real, more present. No longer just a shadow to be enhanced or erased, but a person. Caroline Meredith, who had been used, abandoned, and deliberately forgotten. Whose daughter had died while her father sat warm in his respected house. Who had been erased from history as thoroughly as possible. Sarah knew what she had to do. The restoration wasn't just about recovering an image. It was about recovering a truth. The Monday morning meeting was tense from the start. Sarah sat across from Dr. Marcus Webb in his office, the enhanced photograph displayed on her laptop screen. She had spent the weekend writing up her findings, the historical documentation, Harold Griswold's testimony, the pieces of Caroline Meredith's story she had been able to reconstruct. Marcus read through her report carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page. This is quite a story, Sarah. You've done remarkable research. He looked up at her. But you understand the complications. I do. Mrs. Thornton commissioned a restoration and technically, that's what I've completed. But I think she deserves to know the truth about what's in this photograph. And if she doesn't want to know? If she insists on keeping Caroline Meredith hidden? Sarah had wrestled with this question all weekend. Then I think we have a larger ethical question. Is our job just to serve the wishes of whoever pays us? Or is it to preserve and reveal historical truth? Caroline was deliberately erased. She and her daughter suffered real injustice. If we hide her again, we're complicit in that erasure. Marcus leaned back in his chair. You're right, of course. But there's a difference between our professional obligations and our personal ones. The society contracted to restore a photograph, not to investigate a family scandal. If we deliver something Mrs. Thornton didn't ask for and doesn't want, we risk damaging our reputation and our relationships with donors. So we just pretend we didn't discover anything? I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be strategic. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. Complete the restoration as contracted. Deliver the image Mrs. Thornton requested, with Caroline still hidden. But also prepare a second version, with the full enhancement, and include your research documentation. Present both to Mrs. Thornton and let her choose what to do with the information. And if she chooses to bury it all, then at least our conscience is clear. We'll have done our professional duty and offered the truth. What Mrs. Thornton does with it becomes her responsibility, not ours. It wasn't the answer Sarah wanted, but she recognized the political reality Marcus was navigating. She nodded reluctantly. All right. I'll prepare both versions. But I want it on record that I believe the full truth should be made public. Noted and agreed. Now go finish this, and let's hope Mrs. Thornton surprises us. Sarah spent the next 3 days preparing the deliverables. The contracted restoration showed the Buchanan family as they had presumably wanted to be seen, respectable, legitimate, with no shadows. The second version showed Caroline Meredith clearly, her face and form enhanced to maximum clarity, the infant Mary Catherine visible in her arms. Sarah also prepared a 20-page document detailing her research, complete with photographs of the historical records, Harold Griswold's testimony, and her analysis of the social context that had led to Caroline's erasure that on Thursday afternoon. Margaret Thornton arrived at the Historical Society. She was 86 years old, thin and upright, dressed in a conservative navy suit. Her white hair was styled perfectly, her posture rigid. She carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to respect. Marcus had arranged for them to meet in a private conference room. Sarah set up her laptop and the printed materials, feeling her heart rate increase with nervousness. Mrs. Thornton, thank you for coming, Marcus began. Sarah has completed the restoration work. But during the process, she made some significant discoveries that we feel you should be aware of before we deliver the final product. Margaret's expression was already guarded. What kind of discoveries? Sarah pulled up the enhanced photograph showing Caroline. Mrs. Thornton, this is what was really in the photograph. This young woman was deliberately hidden during the original development, but modern enhancement techniques have revealed her clearly. Her name was Caroline Meredith. She worked for your great-great-grandfather's household, and the infant she's holding was her daughter, Mary Catherine. She handed Margaret the research document. I've documented the full story here, based on historical records and testimony from longtime Crawford County residents. I believe Caroline was James Buchanan's daughter, that she and the child were deliberately hidden from the family history, and that the child died due to neglect in 1893. Margaret took the document but didn't open it. Her hands trembled slightly. You had no right to investigate my family like this. This is an invasion of privacy. With respect, Mrs. Thornton, this isn't a private matter. It's historical record. Caroline Meredith and her daughter were real people who were treated unjustly and then erased from history. I believe their story deserves to be told. Caroline Meredith was a servant who made accusations against my great-great-grandfather. Those accusations were investigated at the time and found to be false. She was a troubled woman who trapped a generous employer in a scandal. Sarah felt her temper rise but kept her voice level. Mrs. Thornton, I've read the historical records. James Buchanan paid for Caroline's housing and supported her daughter through county funds. If he believed Caroline was lying, why would he do that? The truth is he used her, got her pregnant, and then hid the evidence to protect his reputation. You don't know that. You're speculating. I'm interpreting evidence. The photograph alone is damning. Someone deliberately tried to hide Caroline from the image. That's not something you do to someone who's simply made false accusations. That's what you do when the truth is too uncomfortable to face. Margaret stood abruptly. I will not have my family's name dragged through mud based on gossip and partial records. Your job was to restore a photograph, not to create scandal. Marcus intervened smoothly. Mrs. Thornton, please sit down. No one is trying to create scandal. We're offering you choices. He gestured to the laptop screen where both versions of the photograph were displayed side by side. This is the restoration as originally contracted, the photograph showing the 11 documented family members, with the technical artifacts corrected but Caroline remaining hidden. We can deliver this version, and the matter ends here. But we also have this version, showing the complete truth of what the photograph contained. And we have Sarah's research, which provides context. What are you suggesting? We're suggesting that you consider what kind of historical legacy you want to preserve. The sanitized version that perpetuates a cover-up, or the truthful version that acknowledges a wrong was done and gives voice to someone who was silenced. Margaret sat down slowly, her composure cracking slightly. She looked at the two images, her eyes moving between her great-great-grandfather's stern face and Caroline's partially hidden figure. If I choose to acknowledge this woman, what happens? The photograph becomes public. That depends on you, Sarah said, softening her tone. The photograph and the research can remain private, part of your family archive. Or they can be shared more widely, as part of the historical record. But either way, Caroline's story would exist, would be documented and known instead of erased. Margaret was silent for a long time. Sarah watched emotions play across the older woman's face. Defensiveness, anger, but also something else. Uncertainty. Perhaps even recognition. My mother never spoke of this, Margaret finally said quietly. But my grandmother, James Buchanan's granddaughter, she once told me there were things in the family history that weren't spoken of. Shameful things. I was young, maybe 8 or 9, and I asked what she meant. She wouldn't tell me, just said that families sometimes protect themselves by forgetting. She looked up at Sarah. I've spent my life proud of the Buchanan name. My great-great-grandfather was a successful businessman, a church leader. He built something from nothing in those mountains. And now you're telling me he was also a man who ruined a young girl's life and let his own child die. I'm telling you he was human, Sarah said. Capable of both building and destroying. The question isn't whether James Buchanan was good or bad. Most people are both. The question is whether Caroline and Mary Catherine deserve to be remembered as part of that story. Margaret opened the research document and began reading. Sarah and Marcus waited in silence, giving her time to process what Sarah had found. 10 minutes passed. 15 that finally, Margaret looked up. What happened to Caroline after she left Crawford County? Do we know? She disappears from the historical record. I've searched census data, death records across Missouri and surrounding states. Nothing definitive. She may have changed her name, moved far away, started over. Or she may have died young. Without more information, we can't know. So she just vanished. Erased as thoroughly as possible. Margaret closed the document carefully. I would like both versions of the photograph. The sanitized one for my personal family collection. But the complete version, with your research, I want donated to the Crawford County Historical Archives. Let them decide whether and how to make it public. That way, Caroline's story becomes part of the county's history, not just a footnote to the Buchanan family legacy. Sarah felt relief wash through her. That's a generous decision, Mrs. Thornton. It's the right decision. Whatever my great-great-grandfather did or didn't do, that girl and her baby deserved better than to be erased. If I have the power to give them back their place in history, even this late, I should do it. She stood, composed again but somehow lighter. Prepare both deliverables as you've described. Send the complete version to the Crawford County Archives with my authorization for public access. And Miss Mitchell, yes? Thank you for caring enough to look. Caroline Meredith didn't have anyone to speak for her in 1887. I'm glad she has someone now. After Margaret left, Sarah and Marcus sat in silence for a moment. Well done, Marcus finally said. That could have gone very differently. She surprised me. I expected her to protect the family reputation at all costs. Sometimes people surprise us. Sometimes the weight of truth becomes too heavy to carry, and letting it go is actually a relief. Sarah looked at the photograph on her screen, at Caroline's face finally clear and visible. I want to try one more thing. I want to search for what happened to Caroline after 1893. There has to be a trail somewhere. Sarah, you've done enough. You've recovered her story from the Buchanan years. Sometimes that's all we can do. Maybe, but I have to try. She deserves an ending, not just a disappearance. Marcus studied her face, then smiled slightly. You're going to do it regardless of what I say, aren't you? Probably. Then you might as well use society resources. Consider it an official research project. Document it properly. If you find anything, it could be valuable for our understanding of women's experiences in that era. That evening, Sarah began the next phase of her search. She had some advantages now. She knew Caroline's full name, her approximate age, and the year she had left Crawford County. She started with census records from 1900, searching neighboring states, Arkansas, Kansas, Illinois, Iowa. Nothing. She tried marriage records, thinking Caroline might have remarried and taken a new name. She searched death records, hoping not to find an early death but knowing it was possible. She looked through county records for property ownership, business licenses, anything that might indicate a woman matching Caroline's profile trying to rebuild her life. For 3 weeks, she searched in her spare time, following leads that went nowhere, finding women with similar names who turned out to be different people. The historical record had swallowed Caroline as completely as the Buchanan family had intended. Then, late one evening in her apartment, Sarah found something. Not in Missouri or any neighboring state, but in California. A naturalization record from 1902 for a woman who had emigrated from Missouri. Caroline Marie Stevens, formerly Meredith. Age 33. Naturalized in San Francisco after marrying a merchant named Thomas Stevens. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she pulled up California census records. Caroline Stevens appeared in the 1910 census, living in San Francisco with her husband Thomas and 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Occupation listed as seamstress. The youngest child's age suggested Caroline had started her new family relatively soon after arriving in California. She searched further and found a death certificate from 1947. Caroline Marie Stevens had died at age 78 in a care facility in Oakland. The record listed her surviving children and grandchildren. There were 8 names. Caroline had escaped. She had rebuilt her life, found someone who valued her enough to marry her, raised a family, lived to old age. The young woman who had been erased from the Buchanan family photograph had gone on to create her own family story, one where she was centered and valued. Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion. It was a good ending. Not perfect. Nothing could undo the injustice of what had happened to Caroline and Mary Catherine. But Caroline had survived. She had persisted. And now, finally, her full story could be told. The Crawford County Historical Society's small museum occupied 3 rooms of the old courthouse. Louise Perkins had arranged for a special exhibit to coincide with the donation of Margaret Thornton's family photograph and Sarah's research materials. It was a modest affair, a single display case with the photograph, copies of the historical documentation, and a written narrative explaining the discovery. Sarah drove back to Steelville on a Saturday morning in December to attend the exhibit's opening. Snow was falling lightly, dusting the Ozark hills in white. The small parking lot behind the courthouse held perhaps 20 cars, a good turnout for a town of 400. Inside, Harold Griswold sat in his wheelchair near the display case. People clustered around him as he told stories about old Crawford County. He spotted Sarah and waved her over. "Young lady, you did it. You brought her back." Sarah smiled. We did it together. Your testimony was crucial. An elderly woman standing nearby spoke up. Ellen Cooper. My grandmother was Mary Cooper. She was one of James Buchanan's daughters, which makes Caroline Meredith my great-great-aunt, I suppose. Or my great-great-grandmother's. Well, the family tree gets complicated. Did you know about Caroline? Sarah asked. Not until this exhibit was announced. My mother mentioned once that there were complications in the family history, but she never explained. I'm glad to finally know the truth, even if it's not flattering. Caroline deserved better than what my family gave her. Louise Perkins appeared at Sarah's elbow. Sarah, there's someone here who wants to meet you. She led Sarah to a woman in her mid-50s, with dark hair and warm brown eyes. Sarah Mitchell, this is Anna Garcia. She's driven up from Springfield. Anna extended her hand. Miss Mitchell, I can't thank you enough for your work. Caroline Meredith was my great-great-grandmother. Sarah felt her breath catch. You're descended from Caroline? From her California family? My mother was Caroline's granddaughter. We knew about Caroline's first child, Mary Catherine, and what happened in Missouri. It was part of our family story, but we never had documentation, just stories passed down. This photograph is the first actual image we've ever seen of Caroline from that time in her life. And your research provides the historical context we never had. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah pictures. This was Caroline in 1920, with her 3 youngest children. This is her at age 70, at her granddaughter's wedding. That's my mother, there. And this is Caroline's grave in Oakland. We maintain it, but until now, we didn't have the full story of her earlier life to share with the younger generations. Sarah looked at the photographs, seeing Caroline as an older woman, smiling, surrounded by family, clearly loved and valued. It was almost overwhelming to see the continuation of the story, to know that Caroline's suffering hadn't been the end of her narrative. I found her naturalization record, Sarah said, and her death certificate. But seeing these photographs, knowing she had a full life, that means everything. She did have a full life, Anna said. She worked hard, raised her children, was active in her church community. She was a strong woman. But she never forgot Mary Catherine. Every year on March 3rd, Mary Catherine's birthday, Caroline would light a candle and sit alone in her room. My grandmother said Caroline would tell them, I had a daughter before you, and I failed her. She carried that guilt her whole life. She didn't fail Mary Catherine, Sarah said firmly. The Buchanan family failed them both. Caroline did everything she could under impossible circumstances. I know that now because of your research, and I want you to know what this means to our family. For generations, we've carried Caroline's story, but it was incomplete. We didn't have documentation, we didn't have proof. Your work has validated our family's oral history and given us the evidence to tell Caroline's complete story. Margaret Thornton appeared then, moving slowly with a cane, accompanied by a younger woman who appeared to be her daughter. She approached Anna Garcia with some hesitation. Ms. Garcia, I'm Margaret Thornton. I'm descended from James Buchanan. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For what my great-great-grandfather did to your ancestor. For the pain he caused. For the injustice of it all. Anna studied Margaret for a long moment, then took her hand. Thank you. That acknowledgement means more than you might imagine. Our families are connected by tragedy, but maybe also by the possibility of healing. I'd like to know more about Caroline's later life, Margaret said. About the family she built. If you're willing to share. I'd be honored to share. Sarah watched the 2 women talk, representing family lines that had diverged in trauma and injustice but were now reconnecting across generations. It was a small moment of reconciliation, far too late for Caroline and Mary Catherine, but meaningful nonetheless. The exhibit drew visitors throughout the day. Local residents came to see the photograph and read the story. Several people brought their own family photographs, asking Sarah if she could enhance them or help identify unknown figures. She took contact information and explained the process. Harold Griswold told anyone who would listen about his grandfather's memories of Caroline, adding details that Sarah hadn't known. Grandpa said she used to sing while she worked in her garden. Said she had a beautiful voice. Said it was a shame what life did to her, how she deserved better. By late afternoon, as the snow fell more heavily outside, Sarah stood alone for a moment in front of the display case. The photograph was mounted prominently, showing Caroline clearly now, no longer hidden. Next to it was the text Sarah had written. Caroline Meredith, circa 1869 to 1947, came to work for the Buchanan family in 1885. When she became pregnant, she was removed from the household and housed in a tenant building on the property. Her daughter, Mary Catherine, died in 1893 at age 6. Caroline subsequently left Crawford County and rebuilt her life in California, where she married, raised a family, and lived until age 78. This photograph, taken in 1887, was deliberately manipulated to obscure Caroline's presence, an attempt to erase her from family history. Through digital restoration, Caroline and her daughter can finally be seen and remembered. It was such a brief summary of a complicated life. But it was more than Caroline had been given in 1887. It was acknowledgement. It was restoration, not just of an image but of a person's place in history. Marcus Webb had driven down from St. Louis for the opening. He joined Sarah at the display case. "This turned into something bigger than just a restoration project," he said. "It always was bigger than that. I just didn't know it at first. You know what strikes me most? That photograph was taken to show the Buchanan family's success, their respectability. But what it actually captured was the cost of that respectability. The shadow they tried to hide reveals more truth than all the carefully posed subjects in the light." Sarah nodded. "That's why I love historical photographs. They capture what people don't intend. The background details, the uncomfortable expressions, the things that slip through despite people's best efforts to control their image. The truth has a way of surviving even when people try to bury it." As evening approached and visitors began to leave, Anna Garcia found Sarah once more. "I'm heading back to Springfield, but I wanted to give you something." She handed Sarah a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside was a locket on a silver chain. She opened the locket and found 2 small photographs, one of Caroline as a young woman, probably from the late 1890s after she'd arrived in California, and one of a group of children. "That's Caroline in her late 20s, Anna explained. "And those children are her California family, including my grandmother. I want you to have this." You gave Caroline back her voice. "This seems appropriate." "Anna, I can't take this. It's your family heirloom. It's a copy. We had the locket reproduced for the descendants. This one is for you. You're part of Caroline's story now. You're the one who made sure she wasn't forgotten." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She fastened the locket around her neck. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." That night, Sarah stood at the window of her hotel room in Steelville, looking out at the snow-covered town. Tomorrow she would drive back to St. Louis, back to her regular work at the Historical Society. But something had changed. This project had reminded her why she had become a historian in the first place, not just to preserve the past, but to recover the stories of people who had been silenced. She thought about Caroline Meredith, holding her infant daughter in 1887, not knowing what the future held but standing there nonetheless, refusing to be completely erased even when someone was actively trying to hide her. She thought about Mary Catherine, who had lived only 6 years but whose brief life had mattered, whose death had broken something in Caroline but hadn't destroyed her capacity to love again. And she thought about the generations that had followed, the children Caroline had raised in California, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried her strength forward, the family that existed because Caroline had survived and persisted. The shadow in the photograph had been revealed. The hidden story had been recovered. It wasn't a perfect ending. Nothing could undo the injustice that had been done. But it was closure of a sort. Caroline and Mary Catherine had their place in history now. Their story would be told. They would not be forgotten. Sarah opened her laptop and began writing. Not a report or a historical document, but a letter to Caroline, across the bridge of time. "Dear Caroline, I don't know if you ever imagined someone would recover your story, would care enough to look beneath the surface and find what had been hidden. But I wanted you to know, you were seen. You are remembered. Your daughter is remembered. You rebuilt your life after unimaginable loss. You found love again, raised a family, lived fully despite what had been done to you. That took remarkable strength. Your descendant Anna stood in a museum today and told your story with pride. Your great-great-great-grandchildren will know your name, will know what you survived. The Buchanan family's attempt to erase you failed. You were there in 1887, holding Mary Catherine, standing in the shadows but refusing to disappear. And you're here now, in this photograph, in these documents, in the memories of people who never knew you but honor you nonetheless. Your story matters, Caroline. You matter. With respect and admiration, Sarah Mitchell. She saved the letter, knowing she would never send it but feeling better for having written it. Then she closed her laptop, turned off the light, and watched the snow fall over the Ozark Hills where Caroline had once walked, carrying her daughter, hoping for a better life. The shadow had stepped into the light. The silence had been broken. And history, just a little bit, had been made more truthful and complete.